All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Hopefully everybody's able to get in okay. It looks like if you're having any issues, we did go ahead and type up the meeting ID in the chat. So if you're having issues, maybe log out and log back in. That will probably resolve anything. So again, I want to really thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to present another webinar to all of you. Mike Bailey, who you're going to just absolutely love, will be presenting cybersecurity, living through a breach. So we're really pleased to present this. And we've got a few housekeeping items that I'm going to go through. Just to let you know, this program qualifies for one CPE unit based on 50 minutes of instruction and question and answers. To qualify for the CPE, you have to be on the webinar for the entire time, and you must participate in all 3 polling questions. So when you see the polling questions come up, and we'll let you know, just please make sure that you do participate in those, because we do check those to make sure in how long you're on the webinar. So we will be checking that. We've got a lot of material to cover today, and you're going to love the presentation. So if you do have questions, we would ask that you please put them in the Q&A section, and Mike will try to answer them either during the polling session or at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and Mike, you'll love his fascinating session. He'll share his experiences with a recent cybersecurity breach, how it was discovered, how the hackers got in, downtime, costs, and lessons learned. And this isn't your typical PowerPoint presentation. This is a real life story of a typical mid-sized company, not unlike companies where you have worked or dealt with in your career. This story will reveal the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you've got to be kidding me. You will come away with suggestions for reducing vulnerabilities and understanding the need for a thorough disaster recovery plan. Mike has over 35 years of experience in information technology. He's currently the Senior IT Manager at Dornier MedTech America, overseeing the IT infrastructure of the corporate headquarters in, and I'm going to not pronounce this right, Kennesaw, Georgia. Is that right, Mike? He's a partner in the Arizona various global IT projects for their European and Asian offices. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Management Information Systems from Kennesaw State University and has a broad experience from day-to-day end user support to share infrastructure planning, implementation, and management. And I'm very excited to present Mike. I've kind of got a glimpse of his program, and I think you're all going to love it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you again for letting me have an opportunity to present this to you. I'm going to go over here. This is me again, the IT guy, and Cindy was so kind to introduce me with my little bit of credentials there on the right. And as she mentioned, I am the Senior IT Manager at Dornier MedTech, and I also support a partner company of ours in Arizona, and that is where the breach happened that we'll actually talk about in this presentation. But in addition to that, I do help support our global IT projects for Dornier. We're a global organization, and so I help a lot with our CIO working in our European and Asian offices. So I don't know if a lot of you know this, but this presentation was originally scheduled to occur about over a month ago before all this COVID-19 stuff happened. And of course, it was going to be an in-person presentation, and you were going to get to see me standing there with a screen to the right, with my PowerPoint presentation as backup. So, now this is going to mostly be a PowerPoint, and so I hope that you'll still find it interesting and you'll learn some things and have a takeaway. And so, because of COVID, as you know, a lot of things have changed in the past couple of months because of COVID. And I even updated my presentation with a few new slides that kind of reflect some current things that occur, in the cybersecurity world because of it. And this has been kind of a joke in my office, but I thought I'd share with you too that I figured I might as well update my profile picture as well. to show how we're all kind of dealing with the COVID-19 situation. So, so what we're going to talk about today is cybersecurity, and I'm going to go over a little bit about it, but just kind of at a high level, try not to get too deep and too boring. And then I'm going to share with you, in more detail, again, this real life experience we had with a recent attack, and how it happened, what we did to recover, and what the cost was to the organization. And then, as mentioned at the end, we're going to talk about the lessons learned. I've been in IT for over 35 years, and this was the first time I ever experienced dealing with this. And you hear a lot and you read a lot, and you think you know what you're doing. And at one point, I think I have a slide here that says you don't know what you don't know. So there's a lot of lessons learned in this. So to start with, what is cybersecurity? And, one thing we know is that not everyone really understands what cybersecurity is. We all think we have an idea. It's a big term, it's a broad term, and it encompasses a lot of things. But, one thing that we do know is that it's usually inconvenient because our IT people make us do a lot of stuff that usually disrupts our work. But what cybersecurity is, it's just simply the practice of protecting us from malicious attacks such as hacking, viruses, and ransomware. This primarily involves, people and technology. But perhaps the most important point here in cybersecurity is people, because the lack of end user education is typically the weakest link in our cybersecurity defense, as we'll learn as we go through this. So right off, we're going to have our first polling question, and it's basically, do you feel that your organization and its employees have a good defense against cyber attacks? So if you just take a few minutes and respond to the polling. I know a lot of our organizations, we have things in place, and we certainly think that we are protected and we have virus protection and so forth. But as we're going to learn going through this, it often is not enough.
Okay, we'll give everybody just another about 30 seconds to respond. So if you haven't participated in the poll, it is important that you participate for the CPE. So it looks like we've got about 56 out of the 66 that have participated, 64 that have participated. So I'll give you just another minute to participate. Okay, we're going to end the polling and I'll share the results here. Go ahead.
Well, that's good. Okay. All right. So moving along. So, gone are the days when, our biggest threat was, some young kid hacking into our organization, or us getting a virus that infected just our computers. And all we needed were some of these simple antivirus programs and basic firewalls to protect ourselves from our companies. And I've listed some of the big players in antivirus programs, which were kind of the first generation of protection against things. But today, everything is connected to the internet: our homes, our work, our phones, our banks, our social life. Just the other day, and I have no idea how. I'm the IT guy. I actually got a text message from my stove saying that it needed to be cleaned. I don't know how it did it, but it did. But, right now, from my own cell phone in my house, and of course, being an IT guy, I love technology, but, I can turn the lights on and off in my house. I can raise and close my garage doors. I can vacuum the house. I can start my car, see how much gas is in it. I can turn on the hot tub, see my security cameras. I can go online and see my medical records, do my banking, book travel, see my paycheck, rent movies, shop online, and I can even manage some of my network all right from my phone. And of course, this is all called IoT, the Internet of Things. And so we're going to look at some statistics, about cybercrime. And again, this is just kind of a high view and not going to dig in deep, but it gives you a good picture of how big of an issue this really is. So that, they estimate that that cybercrime is expected to reach over $6 trillion by 2021. That's a lot of money. It's estimated that there were 4.1 billion records exposed in data breaches just in the first half of 2019. And a lot of this information is our own personal information that's out there, on the internet, in the web, in what they call the dark web. And what I find interesting about this, and I'll highlight this further in a little bit, is we usually don't hear about most of these data breaches. We typically only hear about the big ones, which make good news headlines like Target. So if you recall, Target reported that up to 40 million records were stolen. And when you know that there was 4.1 billion just in the first half of 2019, that's only 1/100th of the data that was stolen. And we just don't hear about all this other information. And I'm going to further show you just how much is out there in a way that you can check it yourself. So 71% of all these breaches were financially motivated, and 25% were motivated by espionage. And 52% of the breaches featured hacking. So hacking is obviously when someone breaks through your security defense system, firewalls, or what have you, and gets into your corporation's networks or into your own computer. 28% of the breaches involved malware, and malware is just any piece of software that's written with the intent of damaging devices, stealing data, or sometimes just causing problems in a network. So viruses, spyware, and ransomware are among the different kinds of malware. And then phishing was involved in 32% of the time, and that's when people are typically contacted by email or some other mechanism that where someone is posing to be a legitimate person or an institution to trick people into providing sensitive information, such as personal information, banking, credit card, passwords, etc. And then of course, the bad guys are doing it, the cyber criminals, and then they use this information to further exploit your company, yourself, and do other things. So 33% of the hacking involves social engineering. And social engineering just means that it's a non-technical strategy of cyber attacks that relies on human interaction, similar to the phishing, but again, tricking people into breaking standard security practices. And then when they do these things, they're able to gain legitimate authorized access into confidential information in the systems. And there's lots of ways that social engineering plays into that. And again, because everything's being connected through IoT, they have access to all this information. So 68% of the business leaders reported that they feel that their cybersecurity risks are increasing. I mean, that's obvious by that first graph where we saw how exponentially the rate of attacks are going up, the cost of cybersecurity and cyber attacks is doing. So it's estimated that we're going to spend over $133 trillion on cybersecurity in 2022. That's a lot of money, and it really just shows what a big issue cybersecurity is. So this is one of the things that I added into about how COVID-19 kind of plays into this. And, while the world is being crippled with the COVID-19 pandemic right now, the cyber criminals are using this to their advantage to gain access to our computers and our companies. And by playing on our curiosity, our emotions, they lure us into clicking on links and attachments in emails that will affect your computer or even your entire company with viruses and malware and ransomware. They have the cyber criminals have a long history of doing this, whether it is dealing with natural disasters, any of these type of events that go on in our society. They leverage them. One of the security software applications that we use we've implemented is called CrowdStrike, and they send out a weekly newsletter highlighting some of the more forefront events that they're seeing going on in trends. And of course, right now there's a lot of activity going on around COVID-19. And they had this chart here that I thought was really interesting because I highlighted some of the names of some of the email attachments that are coming in on these phishing emails or just ways to try to trick people again. And it just shows you that, no matter how interesting it may seem to you or even relevant to your business, it's very easy to be deceived and to click on something. So you look over here and you see instruction COVID-19 or financial relief, photo of our colleague infected with the COVID-19. And all these different file attachments can be very alluring, and in the midst of being very busy and overwhelmed in our day-to-day businesses, it's really easy to not pay attention and look at these emails closely and click on something, which then is just going to launch an attack. I even saw that it was reported that in March, even the U.S. Health and Human Services Department suffered a cyber attack, that was aimed at slowing down the agency's operations. So these cyber criminals, they don't care. They're just trying to get at us any way they can. So, today the top cyber threat to business is ransomware. And, ransomware is just a type of malicious software. It's a virus that's designed to block access to computer systems until a sum of money is paid. And so we have to look and, and ask, so why is ransomware one of the biggest threats? Well, cybercrime and cyber criminals are making a lot of money from ransomware. They're using sophisticated technologies available today, making it easier and easier to do. And you don't even almost have to be a real hacker anymore, like in the true sense of what we think of hackers doing. And we see on TV where they're, figuring out how to get into systems and writing code and all this stuff. But, make no mistake about it, that ransomware is the new organized crime. And so, why do they do it? Of course, they do it for the money, but it was estimated that in 2019 that hackers earned an estimated $1 billion from ransomware. So you can see the allure there for the guys that are bad and why they're wanting to do it. So, today's cyber criminals, are using really sophisticated automated systems to do in minutes what traditionally used to take hackers weeks or months to do. And they're using artificial intelligence, they're using machine learning, they're using online data breach databases on the dark web, and they're even going as far as they're learning our behaviors, our writing patterns, our schedules. And again, they're able to do this now because that IoT, everything's all connected. When you get one little piece of information, it just opens the door further and further to whether they get a starting point being your Facebook profile or your LinkedIn profile. And we're in the habit of reusing passwords and names, and these computer systems now are able to link all this stuff together and just give a clear, easy path for the bad guys really quickly. And again, something that would have taken them weeks or months to figure out manually. So I mentioned earlier about the number of data breaches and how they tend to be underreported. So, most people don't even realize how much of their personal information is actually out there on the dark web. And it's right at the fingertips of these cyber criminals. And when your information has been stolen from, what they call scraped from a data breach, there's a term they call it pawned. And this simply means that your personal information has been captured during a data breach somewhere. And this information contains your usernames and passwords, your physical address, your employees' information, gender, and all this other information. So there's actually a really neat website, and you're welcome to do this. And as far as I know, it's safe, but it's a website called Have I Been Pawned? And you can go to this website, and you can see here, I'm going to show an example where you can enter in your personal email address or any email address you want, and it'll actually go out and search these databases, and it'll let you know how many data breaches your information shows up in. So you can see here where I entered my information, and you hit the little pawn button, and guess what? My information was found in 13 data breaches. Now, I did this originally about a month ago, and you also notice that it says no paste site. I'll tell you, a paste site is, how we copy and paste stuff. There are sites kind of like posting stuff on Facebook or Twitter where you're able to just go and paste anything you want and post it into this online blog or community, and a lot of them are searchable, and people are able to, just go and find information. And a lot of it is geared around programming and coding and stuff, but there's a lot of cyber criminal stuff out there as well. But what's interesting is a month ago I did this, and I was in 13 data breaches and no paste, and I checked it again this morning, and I'm now in 14 breaches and 1 paste. I was going to do a live demo of this one particular site called pastebin.com, which is a very popular place, because a month ago, when you went to this site, there was a search box at the top, and you could go there, and I just simply typed in the word credit card and hit search, and I mean, a list, this long showed up of all these posts, these pastes that had been done by who knows who, containing credit card information. And I was going to show how I clicked on this one, and it opened up, and I mean, right there was the person's name, their credit card number, their address, the CVC code, and the expiration date, and the whole bit, just a running list of them. But when I went out and was checking this again yesterday, preparing for our webinar, the search box is missing from the website now, so it's not there. But it was a good like, oh my gosh, kind of a moment thing, because you didn't even have to be a hacker. You didn't even have to know how to get on the dark web, and you could just go right out and see all of those credit card numbers. So as I went in and looked at some of the places that I've been pawned, here's an example of, in October 2019, there was 1.2 billion records obtained in this one data breach. And like, I don't know about you, but I didn't hear about this in the news. I heard about Target, and remember Target was 40 million, and here is 1.2 billion records. And you can see here that this includes email addresses, employer, geographic locations, names, phone numbers, social media profiles. Here's another one that I was included in, LinkedIn. How many of us are members of LinkedIn? Well, they had a data breach in 2016 where 164 million records, were obtained, again, containing email addresses and passwords. And even innocent apps that you may have on your smartphones can be part of a data breach. So I had joined up on MyFitnessPal, was trying to track my calories and so forth. And in 2018, they had a data breach, 144 million records were taken, email addresses, passwords, usernames. So all of this starts building this profile of people where these computer systems, again, can go in and query out of these databases and pull all this information together to start getting at you. So, the attack that happened to me that we'll go through in a moment was the result of ransomware. And so we said ransomware is a form of malware that it encrypts a victim's files, and then the attacker then demands a ransom to be paid to decrypt the files. Now, some of you have probably heard of software as a service before. That's a paid service. So like Microsoft Office, for example, Office 365 is an example. So it's a cloud-based software system that instead of you purchasing software, downloading it, installing it on your computer, or your company putting it on their network, you just simply pay a subscription to access the software online through your internet browser. And so ransomware as a service is now a paid-for service on the dark web. It's an actual business that people are running, and because it's so easy, again, you don't really have to be a hacker to do it anymore. You just pay for it and use it, just like Office 365. So the way that the ransomware as a service works is that a hacker will create an account with what's called a RAS distributor, and they're given free, unlimited access to all of the ransomware services. They get all the tools. They get a list of who to attack because they've already gone out and found vulnerabilities or weaknesses in organizations. And then the hacker himself is still responsible for launching the actual attack, but the RAS distributor takes care of collecting the ransom. They provide all the mechanisms to do that, and they deduct a percentage of the ransoms before they then take the hacker's percentage and deposit it into the account that they set up for them. And then the distributor continues to upgrade and maintain the ransomware variant, and variant just means the current version of that virus, as defenses are developed against it, so that it kind of maintains its street value. It keeps working because they keep upgrading and changing it to defeat all the current things that we put in place to protect ourselves. And that's been an ongoing battle since the beginning of computers and viruses coming out, is that we've traditionally always been reactive. The bad guys make a new virus, we start detecting it, some people get infected, we build ways to detect it, to block it going forward, and then at the same time, the bad guys are building a new version that the software can't detect, and around we've gone for years and years. So earlier this year, I was able to attend a cybersecurity conference, and it was really interesting because the Department of Homeland Security was a presenter there. I didn't even know that they actually have a Department of Homeland Security Cyber Defense Department that's dedicated to doing this. But according to them, the guy that's talking to us, that there's 333,000 new malware versions or variants created every day. And that, he broke it down to where it was 229 every minute, and a new one being created every 4 seconds. And again, remember that these new cyber criminals are using very sophisticated technology to manage all of this, and that's why it's able to change so rapidly and keep getting past the current defense things we have in place. I mentioned earlier that the cyber criminals are now using sophisticated tools in their attacks, and they're using artificial intelligence and computer learning, and the usage of this is growing rapidly. So this is something that the Homeland Security presenter talked about, which I found to be very alarming. But most of us have all received emails, which is really obviously fake due to poor grammar and broken English from an obviously bad language translation, right? We've seen these. But the presenter said that very soon it's going to be practically impossible to tell when an email's been spoofed, because the cyber criminals are now getting into our networks, and they're using these AI tools to sit quietly and they learn about us. It seems that much of the whole cybersecurity industry right now is now building new AI technology into their software as well, just as the criminals, so we can learn our own behaviors and detect when something out of character happens, like two people emailing each other that normally don't, or when a computer's showing activity outside of your normal business hours. So one example that they gave, which was pretty interesting to demonstrate this, was in this particular office, we'll just call the two people Jane and John, and they work with each other, they know each other, and they're friends. And in this example, let's just say that Jane, has a nickname for John. She calls him Knucklehead, and so John knows just from their personal relationship that Jane's going on vacation in a week and that she's going on a cruise, and then all of a sudden, John gets an email that says it's from Jane. And in this email, it's got the language and the wording, the way that Jane talks, and it says, "Hey, knucklehead, I'm going on vacation to the Caribbean on a cruise next week. I'm expecting an email to come in for approval for a cash transfer. When I send that to you, would you mind just going ahead and approving it?" And so, why would John not think that was from Jane? Why would he suspect that it was anything else? Because who else besides her would know to call him knucklehead and know that she's going on a cruise? But because of this artificial intelligence, computer learning, it's sitting there figuring all this stuff out, looking at her social media profiles, looking in these data breaches, linking it all together. It's learned how she talks. It knows from her calendar, from her post on Facebook, she's going on the cruise, and it builds these emails to come in and trick us. There was even a recent example featured in the Wall Street Journal where the criminals used an AI-based software to replicate a CEO's voice to request a transfer of approximately $243,000. So it's just unbelievable what the cyber criminals are doing now and how sophisticated they're getting. So I talk about how these things get into our networks and they're just sitting there waiting and they're pulling it all together. And the Homeland Security presenter gave us this scenario, and he said, while it's not common, it is happening more and more. And and this was a real example he gave of something they saw, and it just shows how vulnerable we all are and how the most innocent activities can create a huge security risk for ourselves and our organizations, without us even knowing it. So these crime rings, they pull it all together, and they're sneaking in when we're not looking, and they're waiting. So in this example, a hacker goes out and he finds the profile of a CFO, for example, in a data breach. And when he's looking through that, he also gets their Facebook information, and he goes out and they're monitoring the Facebook, and they see lots of posts of animal videos and posts about this new Nest thermostat that they got and how much they love it, right? So the hacker, takes advantage of this, and he makes a post to their timeline with a link to a real funny animal video. And the CFO, being the animal lover that they are, they click on the link and they're watching the video, but they don't realize at the same time they just download a virus that goes and looks for their Nest thermostat and plants itself there. And then the Nest, which of course is connected to your home Wi-Fi, it just sits and waits, and it's monitoring their home network, their Wi-Fi, and it's waiting for them to get a connection through a VPN, which typically we do when we work from home. We connect into our offices through VPN, right? And sure enough, the CFO makes a connection from their home into the main office to the VPN, and then now the hacker, has a direct access straight into the company, bypassing all security measures that people have put in. And I mean, this was just amazing to me. I just, how could a Nest thermostat be responsible for leading to your company getting hacked and breached? It's just amazing. And he even talked about things of how when we all travel, when we get in our cars and we link our smartphones up to the Bluetooth so we can call people. And he said he did a demo at his last conference where he walked out and took his computer and hooked up something, and right up on the screen came in everybody's phone books with their phone numbers and addresses and email and all this contact information that we just leave behind because we're just so unknowing and trusting with it. So, so this starts leading to our next poll question, and we're going to use this information a little bit, but it's how many of you in your offices have a password cheat sheet, where you store usernames and passwords and account information for your business, maybe your accounting department or whatever, and you have this spreadsheet protected with a password to keep people in. So that's our next poll question.
Mike, while we're waiting, there was a question that came up. The question is, do you feel that subscribing to a VPN is effective in reducing these risks?
Well, you know, the whole thing about a VPN is that it is a secured connection between you and your company. And there's security, what they call a security wrapper, a VPN, and they call it a tunnel. And in effect, you can imagine it being just a long network cable between your office and your computer at home. So yes, I mean, VPNs do offer a lot of protection. It keeps external people from being able to capture the information going between you and your office and doing what they call sniffing it and hacking it and getting it that way. So, I mean, it can reduce those types of risk, but in the example I gave, it in itself is not offering any protection from something getting infected on your own computer or one of your internet connected devices in your house, because once your computer makes the connection, it is a wide open tunnel into the organization. That's why you have to have other security features in place to monitor for malicious types of activity. So if something does start trying to come in, it can be detected and stop it. And I'll give an example of that later on, something that we're actually using.
Great. All right, well, we'll go ahead and end the polling real quick, and I'll share the results here.
I thought it would be a lot higher that people would have these cheat sheets. So what we're going to do here, we're going to move on, and So learn to hack. So, you know, before we go through the ransomware attack that I experienced, I want to do a little demo for you. And I say here, they say, but I don't know if they really say this or not, but they say if you want to catch a hacker, you got to think like a hacker, right? So how about I quickly teach all of you, you know, how to be a hacker. So I asked you a minute ago, how many of you have a password cheat sheet that you think is safe because it's password protected? So I'm going to do a little demo for you. And I'm going to bring up a folder here. Hopefully everybody can see that. And you can see here, this is my password cheat sheet. It's an Excel file. And if I go to open this up, indeed, it will pop up and it asks me for a password. And if I type in the wrong thing, it won't let me in. It says the password's wrong and I can't get in and get to my stuff, right? So what I want to demonstrate though is, without being a hacker, without being on the dark web, I'm going out to this website here called lostmypassword.com, and there's a Microsoft Excel password recovery. I'm going to check a box here that says I'm not a robot, and then it wants me to upload a file. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to pick my password protected spreadsheet and click open. It's going to upload it, and in less than a minute, we're going to see it's going to pop up, and it tells me that my password is password123, which, by the way, is one of the most commonly used passwords in the world. And it just shows you why it's important to have, and I mentioned this later, password policies that require people to create complex passwords. So now that we know the password is 123, I will pull my spreadsheet back up. And then when it asks me for the password, I'll type in hopefully I'll spell it right, PASSWORD 123. I think I mistyped it. Nope. And there you go. So there's my fictitious company password vault, and with my bank account, username and password, and the ADP and 401 and all this other stuff. So you can see it's not hard to be a hacker these days. There's just so many tools out there at the fingertips, and I'm by no means a hacker. I wouldn't know how to do. I know how to do this because I've had to, but it just shows you how easy this stuff is. And the things that the bad guys are using is, you know, certainly way more sophisticated than this. Okay, so we're going to close this down. So now I'm going to go through, you know, living through the attack, what happened with us that I recently experienced. So back in October of 2019, our partner office was attacked by the Soden-Okabe ransomware virus. And recall that a ransomware gets in and encrypts all your files, and then it demands you pay a ransom to get them unencrypted. Well, this particular virus is titled the Crown Prince of Ransomware on the internet because it's so effective and so sophisticated. It first appeared in April of 2019, and then the first time it really reared its head was there were some major attacks that occurred in Germany, and then in August later that year it made its way to the United States, into Texas, and there were a lot of local state and local entities that were attacked with it. And then in September, they actually compromised WordPress sites to help distribute the virus. And now, if you don't know, WordPress is the most common website platform and used today where people are building websites. When you see like Wix.com and all this stuff, it's all based on WordPress. And then in December, a real bad attack happened to this company called Travelex, which is a foreign currency provider. And then also at the same time, the servers at the New York airport were attacked as well. And then in January of 2020, just this year, for the very first time, the Soden-Okabe group, and they're like a company, they published stolen data for the very first time on the dark web. And why this is important is that historically, ransomware only got in, encrypted your files, they got paid, and then they were out. But now, these cyber criminals have learned the value of also taking the data and holding it for hostage for additional ransom with the threat of making it public if the ransom's not paid. So they're now hitting people twice. People are paying to get the decryptions, which may or may not happen. And even if they do get it decrypted, then they're turning right around and getting a communication saying, okay, now if you don't pay us $50,000 more, we're going to release all your information on the internet. And of course, that opens up a world of hurt for a company who has to face the fallout and the backlash of being breached. So a little bit about, setting the stage there about this company. So again, this occurred at one of our partner companies that I helped manage. And I started managing their IT about 3 years ago. And they are in the medical industry, so they have to be HIPAA compliant. And they have close to 150 employees, and about 75% of them all work remotely. So there's only about maybe 30 people in the office. So in this attack, the fact that they are in the medical industry, and because of the HIPAA laws, this was a big deal because there was a huge potential for litigation against the company in case, like I pointed out, it was determined that data was actually taken from the company during the breach. We went through some forensic investigation with an outside firm, and it was determined that this did not occur, and so we were okay with that. And it's funny because in that situation, I learned that if you're not able to prove that data was not taken, you still have to go public and say, hey, we were breached and your information may have been taken, which you can imagine it doesn't sit well with your customers. So the infrastructure at this company, there was a lot of unknowns. I used the iceberg here because, there was more unknown in this company to me coming in, taking over than was known, the tip of the iceberg thing. The company was founded in 2009, and they didn't have any on-site IT for the 3+ years prior to me helping out. And before that, there were many IT managers before me, so they all did their own things. And we have a virtual environment there that was running at the time 43 virtual servers before the attack. And when I inherited this, as an example, I had this one document that had a description of some of the servers. And one of the descriptions literally said, quote, I have no idea what this server holds. So that was kind of the boat I was in dealing and supporting this new environment. Now, after the attack and putting everything back online and going through it, out of those 43 servers, I determined that only 20 of them were actually necessary and needed. And that was an important lesson learned that we'll cover later on too. but they had 3 firewalls, 6 network switches. They had 3 different pieces of equipment for backup and all this other stuff. And I've been rebuilding the infrastructure there and reduced all this down to just 2 firewalls and 2 switches and 1 backup appliance. And again, there was all this unknown, unnecessary legacy stuff just sitting around running that we had no idea what it was doing. So, here the unknowns in this situation, this was perhaps the biggest lesson for me anyway that was learned through this whole thing. So, how did they get in? So it turned out, that we had this old server running that used to host the website for the company internally for many, many years, way before I ever started there. And but the website had recently, I would say within a month or 2 of the attack, had recently moved offsite into the cloud and was hosted offsite. But the server was left running because we didn't know if there was something else running on it that we didn't know about. And this is the classic unknown mistake. Leave it running because we don't know what will happen if we turn it off. And I would be amazed if your IT departments and your organizations don't have a similar situation, particularly if you've had turnover in your IT department. It just happens. So, and this is a part where I try not to get too techie, but I have to tell you some of this to explain. But so we all have heard the term a firewall, and so by default, a firewall is designed to block all incoming traffic. That's the way they are. When you open them up and plug them in the very first time, nothing can get in. It'll let you go out, but nothing can come in. And so you have to start creating rules to allow different types of traffic. And all this traffic comes through what are called ports. And so ports just are simply, they identify different types of internet traffic, and they're assigned industry standard numbers so that firewall rules can be built and configured to allow certain types of traffic to come in. So for example, if you have a website, websites, when we see HTTP, that's called a protocol, and it always goes over port 80. Well, apparently, in this situation, someone in the past had opened up a port that is used for remote desktop on the server. And it was later determined that this was the entry point for the hacker. Some of you may have used remote desktop before. It comes, every one of our computers have it. You can open it up and you can put in an address, and it allows you to remotely connect to another computer. But in the past, someone had opened this up through the firewall so that someone could remote desktop into this web server for whatever reason. Not a good practice anyway, but it was there and I didn't know it. So the actual attack was discovered around 9 a.m. Eastern time. I think maybe that might have been Arizona time, but we noticed it because our remote users started putting in support tickets and calling saying that they weren't able to connect into the office via a remote access server. And this was something that I had set up that, unlike remote desktop, it was another way of remotely accessing your network through the internet, and it didn't require you to have a VPN running. If you wanted to remote desktop, you had to have the VPN up and running. So I called my IT support person there on site, and we started a remote session with each other so we could figure out what was going on and fix the problem. And, these types of things have happened before, and I was expecting to see, some familiar messages when I went in saying that the remote desktop services wasn't working, and we were just going to get everything turned back on and be up and running again. But then when I started checking all the typical stuff to make sure that the remote desktop services were running, I suddenly noticed all these weird drive mappings. There were these mappings that went from A all the way to Z. We all probably have drive mappings where certain letters are mapped to our network file servers. Like in our office, we have the S for the shared drive and the P for the public drive, and you may have other mappings, but every single alphabetical letter, A through Z, was mapped. And they weren't mapped to the things that we normally see where there's like a name. They were all mapped, like in this example, to an IP address and then some folder. And when I saw this, my first thought was like, well, this is kind of strange. I wonder who did this, because I've seen stranger things happen, especially out of this office. And so I just went on, my way, and I cleaned it up by removing all the drive mappings. So then I found it. This was the first sign of trouble. I went out and looked on the desktop, and I saw this file that was named xbvg4b.readme.txt. And I thought, well, this is strange, and I didn't recall ever seeing it before. So it was a text file. So again, I'm not suspecting anything's wrong at this point, and I'm just looking around. So I opened the text file, and I saw the words that every IT guy dreads the most: your files are encrypted and unavailable. And that's when that's when my stomach turned, right then. So I went on, and it went on to say that they wanted me to use what's called a Tor browser, and I can talk about that later, but it's a special browser to access the dark web, and they wanted me to pay a ransom, to get the decryption keys. So I started going in and checked, and I opened up my file and folders, and sure enough, every single file on the server was encrypted. You can see here where I highlighted every file had been renamed with the extension of those letters that were in part of that README note. And so, by this time, though, the virus had been running and spreading, and it had spread to every single server on the network. And that's what all those strange drive mappings were for. The virus had mapped these drives to access everywhere. And so every file on every server was encrypted and useless. And also, we found that every computer that was left on in the company had been encrypted as well. So, this brought the entire company to a halt, because nobody could do anything. Any applications, like, if you have an on-premise ERP system, which ran on the server, they wouldn't work because the files were encrypted and nothing could access and use them. So, as I mentioned, the hijackers wanted us to go into the dark web and pay a ransom to get the decryption keys. And they want you to pay in Bitcoin. You've probably heard of that, and it's an interesting thing to read about. But I didn't go out and look because I personally don't believe that it would work, and we'll talk about that. But this is an example that I found of what it looks like when you go to the site. And you can see here where they show that the current conversion rate of Bitcoin was putting the cost at $2,500, but they also pressure you in that if you don't pay the ransom within a certain amount of time, then they're going to double the ransom. And I've heard all different kinds of figures about when this happens, and a lot of times, depending on how sophisticated the attackers are and what research they've done, they may scale the ransom based upon how big your organization is and what they know about it. I've heard people saying ransoms that started at $50,000 or $100,000. So I don't know what ours actually would have been, but even in this low scenario, one of the things that I also noticed was that I found 10 different encryption keys on our servers. So remember, I talked about this as ransomware as a service. So what that means is that at least 10 different people paid for the same hacking kit that contained the information on how to get into this organization. And so at least 10 different people had encrypted the files. And so, they all claim to be, honest, and if we're going to do this, but what if you paid the ransom and you got to the 10th person, for example, and then they chose to just take your money and run? You're still encrypted. Even though maybe the first 9 people would have given me the decryption keys, I still could have ended up encrypted and not able to get our stuff back. But there's a truth about ransomware. And at first, let me say, this is what I've been told. And but that less than 1% of the people who pay the ransom actually get their files decrypted. And despite all the stuff that you can find on the internet when you do searches, none of the advertisements offering to decrypt your files work. You simply can't decrypt an encrypted file. That's the whole nature of encryption. It takes supercomputers, sometimes years or, who knows how long to actually go through the algorithms of figuring out what the decryption key is and being able to decrypt things. But, there's different opinions about that. So in IT, there's always complete and opposite opinions on every subject. Run into this all the time, that, half of the IT community will say, never do it, and the other half will say, do it, and then the debates ensue, and someone in the middle like myself, you don't know which direction to go sometimes when you're trying to find an answer. And paying a ransom is another one of these topics. So my previous slide was based upon information that I felt like I knew, and I also received from professionals at that security conference that I was at. But, here's a quote in a totally different opinion from ZDNet article in 2019 that says just the opposite. They say that 96% of the time, paying the ransom will result in getting the files decrypted. But they also say that, I think it's in here somewhere, that you may only get a certain percentage, with 93% of the data recovered, a 7% potential data loss. So, but I think that's the most important thing here, is that this is not 100%. You have to ask yourself, do you want to take that risk? Do you want to be the 4% that's not going to, if this is true, you want to be the 4% that's not going to get the decryption keys after you paid the money, or if you did, you want to risk losing 7% of your data? So you have to ask yourself, do I want to take these chances? And, do I want to pay, or do I want to try to restore my servers? And that's the hard question. And so the problem is, though, is that you don't get to choose. When it comes to paying, you don't get to choose what 7% of the data you're going to lose, right? 7% doesn't seem bad, but, that depends on which 7% you lose. If it's 7% of, some old historical files that most likely will never be needed again, who cares? But if it's 7% of your current active accounting files, maybe a totally different story. So I know we're at 11 o'clock and I'm going to have to move along, but so we're going to go through, gosh, I got a lot left. So we went through the recovery process, which was to start going through, and we had to prioritize the order that we're going to bring the servers up, had to bring them back up online. And this is a very lengthy process because there's a lot of data that has to be restored. We had to bring some people on site to help reload all those computers that were taken. And then in the middle of it, we ran into what I call the perfect storm, because we ran into some issues with our backups. And so I said long days and sleepless nights, because in the first week from when I first discovered it until 11:30 on that Sunday, I spent 110 hours straight working, recovering just the critical servers to get them back online and doing stuff. And then the next week, I spent another 150 hours recovering the rest of the servers and had them. And then the full recovery continued on for several months. And just different issues come up from that about, security permissions changing, little minor things, users missing stuff from their computers after they had to be reloaded. And, the cost of the ransomware to your business can be devastating. I heard a quote recently that 60% of businesses, go out of business, because of the cost of it. So you have all these hard costs and soft costs that it takes to get everything back up and running. We spent probably $10,000 to $20,000 just on different consultants and so forth. So the billing department, was hit the hardest at this company. And this is a quote I got from the manager where, they were shut down for 4 days. They weren't able to build almost $800,000 in services. They lost about $100,000 in business. Their department was cut in half because they didn't have computers and nothing to do. So then you had to pay overtime to the people who were able to work. And in the end, in total, it was estimated that this attack cost this company, $1 million. So, what do we do in the lessons learned in this is, we have to go back and examine our organizations. We have to look at our policies and procedures and infrastructure. Are they relevant? You have to ask why. Remember how I talked about these unknowns ended up being the opening that let people get in. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you test it and really test it? You actually need to go through all the steps, not just say, yes, we have a plan. Yes, we're backing up our servers. I know we can do this. Because part of our recovery plan was in our backup procedure, I was supposed to be able to instantly virtualize these servers up in the cloud and give people remote access to it. And that was my first approach. But when I tried it, it didn't work in the cloud. Some of the servers wouldn't start, so I had to resort to doing the restores. We need to have clear step-by-step instructions to follow during the cyber attack, who to contact, what your initial actions are, what your recovery process is going to be, what are the critical business functions. You need to ensure you've got complex password policies and audits are conducted to ensure that they're being changed. You need to implement two-factor authentication, on at least critical positions and departments. We need to have communication established. That was a big disruption during this recovery process, was that while we were in there just sweating it out, trying to get everything going, we were getting phone calls and people walking in upset and concerned about when am I going to be able to get back online, when can I get back to work and do all this, and all of that just kept us from taking care of the task at hand, which was restoring everything. And then another real important thing here is about data access. If you have the ability, move your critical data to the cloud if possible. Whether if you're on Office 365, you have OneNote and Teams and things like that, which we use in our office. But the file server that was being backed up, and we were able to restore it, but it literally took days just to restore that amount of data before it could even be used again. And had this information been stored in the cloud, we could have had immediate access to it, and people working remote could have been able to get at some of their data to keep them in business. And then probably the most important thing of all is employees need to be trained on security best practices. There's lots of resources available online to do training, and we really need to develop cybersecurity training programs in our organizations that are required, and they're conducted on an annual basis or even as needed, since the whole cybersecurity thing changes so rapidly. So
hey, Mike.
Yes.
We're actually past 11, and I want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity. So would you mind if we go ahead and just launch this last poll so that if people do have to get off, they can, but Mike is happy to stay on. And so if you all want to, continue listening, go ahead and we'll let you go ahead and vote on this last poll. The question is, do you feel that your organization and its employees are properly equipped and trained to defend itself from cyber security attacks? So what we're going to do is, if you're interested. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut in on you.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
But I just know that some people may have other meetings to go to. So
sure.
Mike is going to answer some questions if you all have anything, and we'll go from there. I think there were a couple questions in the Q&A, Mike, if you want to answer some of those.
Yeah, so one of them says, what if 7-zip your password list? Yeah, there again, that's the same thing. If you're encrypting your password list, with 256-bit, the question was, what if you zip your password list with 256-bit encryption? Same thing again, just like I was saying before, you can't decrypt encrypted stuff. That certainly protects it better. And in my example, if that file had been zipped, I would not have been able to hack it as easy, something like that. There was another person here who made a comment that said, they had been hacked, but they've had clients who've been hacked, and they almost always pay the ransomware and they get their stuff back. And that's what that one poll, said, that 96% of the people do get their stuff back. And that's high. But what if you're the 4% that don't? You hear about it. It is a risk. It's a gamble. And then if you did get it back, what if you lost, a percentage of your data, as we pointed out? And I've also heard that even when you get these decryption tools, that they are very slow and they take a long time to decrypt all of your files as well. So it does happen, and it does work for people, certainly. So someone else wrote here and said, my personal email received an email with one of my passwords is known. What does this mean? So yeah, I see that sometimes on, like I've noticed on Google, I'm probably bad. I have a particular password that I use on a lot of things, and even Google fusses at me now because I sometimes go in and say, remember my password, and these things are going out and looking at the same data breaches that we're looking at, searching for your information. They're trying to warn us. I subscribe to Credit Karma, and every once in a while I'll get a message from them saying, we found your stuff in a data breach. So another person said, I feel we have a strong IT security program, but there's also so many vulnerabilities.
Someone also asked in the chat, Mike, what about LastPass?
Yeah, I personally use that as a password thing. I really don't have an opinion of it. I've read that it's really secure, that all their stuff's encrypted, and I use it personally to keep track of my passwords now. But I really can't speak to how secure it is, if someone could hack it or not. I really don't know. So someone here said, what's your number one advice regarding passwords? Passwords need to be complex and not common things. Remember that these computer systems are going out and looking at your social profile and everything, so don't make your password the name of your dog or your child or something like that. And I've also read one time that longer passwords that are more language-like, like if you made your password like, I like to go to Disney World on vacation as one long password, that's more secure than coming up with a short password where we do the typical character substitution where we put the @ symbol for an A and the exclamation for one. All of those things increase the complexity of the password, make it harder for programs to crack them because they're going through doing character substitutions, and they know what we substitute. We all do 3s for E's and exclamations for 1s and so forth.
So here was a question too. Do you know how the company was targeted by the criminal?
So I don't know exactly, but these you hear about things they call bots and stuff. And one of the things I mentioned, I was going to show in my last slide, is some of the things you need to do is called penetration testing. So what penetration testing does is it's an external service that you can pay for, and you can actually find free ones that you can do as a trial for 30 days. Is what we did a lot. But they actually just kind of pound on your firewall and they look for these vulnerabilities. And so if there are these open ports, these penetration test services will report and let you know that we found these vulnerabilities, and you can pay for them. They can go anywhere from $5,000, I've seen, to $20,000, depending on how deep into your organization you want them to go, and can report out. So probably some cyber criminal thing out there was doing a type of penetration testing and identified that this firewall had this remote desktop port open, and that's part of the information that they sold in that ransomware as a service. So someone said here, in general, why is cloud safer than your own server? I don't know if I don't know if it's necessarily safer than your own server. It's better protected. It becomes, putting stuff in the cloud can be part of your disaster recovery plan, in that if something happens to your organization, you get a fire or a disaster or tornado or something, then your data is protected because it's off-site, right? That was even in the old days when we used to back up to tapes. We used to pay people to come pick our tapes up and take them off-site just for that reason. But in terms of it being secure, I'd say anybody is susceptible to being hacked, but you generally don't hear that Microsoft or Google or any of these big companies are getting hacked, because they certainly have a lot more financial resources and monitoring software and teams of people that are protecting the data inside their network than most of our organizations have, where we may have, you know, a small one-person IT department like myself up to even a large group. We have these things in place that just run. So someone said, how secure is having data on a business Dropbox? Same thing that I just said. I tend to think that, again, I just tend to think that these organizations just have a lot more sophisticated security protection places or devices in place. I've never heard of Dropbox getting hacked, but someone could. You know, there's probably some 10-year-old kids sitting out there that could hack into it. But one of the things I will tell you is that, like, we had some of the computers that were on in the offices, and when the virus spread to the computers and encrypted their files, Dropbox was still running, and it uploaded and synced the encrypted files up to Dropbox. And so we actually were able to call Dropbox and ask them to restore that individual's Dropbox from a couple of days before. They had backups and put it in there. And that's something you need to check in these services. Like, by default, you know, when we have Office 365 and our email is really in the Microsoft cloud, Microsoft doesn't literally back up your mailbox up there. That's why we all think it's kind of protected, but they don't. You know, they could. It's in their license agreement that if something happened to their server, you know, you could lose your stuff. But they have redundant systems and things to help protect that, much more elaborate than we typically have in our own networks, of course.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, another thing that they even pointed out, that cybersecurity thing is real simple. You know, it's like, if you want to keep the bad guys from coming into your house, the first thing you do is you lock your front door, right? And that's real easy. And so two-factor authentication is a really simple thing that we can all implement in our organizations to help protect us. And so we did that for our accounting staff and our senior management, so that if people try to log in to their Office 365 accounts, even if they happen to somehow get their credentials or figure them out through all this linked information, when the person tries to log in, you get notified and said, hey, you need to approve this login. You know, typically it's an app on your phone, and that itself can help protect you from getting hacked and people getting into your account. We had a situation where one of our employees' accounts actually got compromised, and someone was in there sending and receiving emails with our corporate office without the user even knowing it, and was requesting money be transferred and so forth. And the person at the other end, you know, wrote back and said, hey, is this for real? And the hacker was, you know, had the mailbox, and they replied back and said, yeah, you know, it is. And it just so happened they happened to copy someone else on the email message, and that's how it got brought to attention, and we were able to you know, figure out what was going on there.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much. If there aren't any other questions, we'll go ahead and close out the program. I do want to thank you so much. This has really been a great program. So I hope that all of you have enjoyed it as much as I have, and that we will be sending out the CPE certificates probably within a week. So we'll try to get those out to you as quickly as we can. And if you have any questions or comments you'd like to share on this presentation, just feel free to drop me an email at cindy.stanley@afwa.org. We just really are always love hearing from our members, and so I just really want to thank you all so much for your time today. Please check out our website. We do have some other ones coming up, and we would again like to thank you, Mike, so much for everything. So we'll go ahead and end the webinar.
Thank you.
So thank you all.
I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Mike.